My mother slammed a thick envelope onto the linen tablecloth. It slid, hitting my glass with a sharp clink. Spilling out were receipts totaling $250,000, Italian marble, an infinity pool, a complete beach house renovation for my sister. She leaned back with cold eyes and ordered me to pay the bill. My sister smirked, waiting for my usual panic. Instead, I picked up a receipt and smiled. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Maya Revenge Stories. Unfortunately, our channel has recently been demonetized by YouTube, leaving us without the budget to keep operating and bringing you the content you love. If you find today's story compelling, please consider supporting us by joining our Patreon, where you can listen to exclusive, longer, and even more incredible true stories with highly detailed situations that we simply cannot make public on YouTube, fully brought to life by a cast of multiple emotional voice actors. You can join our community by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link down in the video description or the pinned comment. Now, let us begin today's story, told from the perspective of our protagonist, Nova Wood. The rain was coming down in thick, freezing sheets across Harbor's Edge, Massachusetts, beating relentlessly against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Mariner, the most exclusive seafood restaurant in the Bay Area. Inside, the atmosphere was a masterclass in manufactured warmth. The air smelled richly of brown butter, seared scallops, and expensive cedar. Crystal chandeliers cast a soft, golden glow over the mahogany tables, and the low hum of wealthy patrons discussing their investment portfolios provided a constant, muffled soundtrack. Yet, at our table, tucked away in the most secluded corner of the dining room, the temperature felt like absolute ice. I am 32 years old, and I have spent my entire adult life navigating the emotional minefield that is my family. Sitting directly across from me was my mother, Eleanor, her posture rigid, her face set in that familiar mask of cold calculation. Next to her sat my younger sister, Harper. Harper was swirling her glass of aged Pinot Noir, her eyes gleaming with a strange, manicured smugness. The tension at the table was thick enough to choke on. It was a silent, psychological ambush, and the trap had not even been sprung yet. I took a slow breath, cutting into my salmon but tasting absolutely nothing. Every instinct I possessed screamed that something was terribly wrong. My mother had insisted on this dinner, demanding we meet at exactly 8 o'clock, but she had barely touched her expensive meal. Instead, she had been watching me with the predatory patience of a hawk waiting for a field mouse to make a wrong move. Harper, usually entirely absorbed in her own reflection, kept shooting me these sharp, sideways glances. She looked like a spoiled child, holding a malicious secret she was desperate to shout out loud. The charade ended abruptly right before our waiter could step forward to offer us the dessert menu. My mother set her heavy silver fork down on her pristine porcelain plate. The sharp clink echoed like a gunshot over our small table. Without a single word, she reached into her $1,000 designer handbag and pulled out a thick manila envelope. It was heavy, bulging at the seams, looking entirely out of place in such a fine establishment. With a flick of her wrist, she tossed it. The envelope slid like a heavy puck across the stark white linen tablecloth, scattering salt from a nearby shaker before smacking hard into my left hand. The flap of the envelope tore open on impact. A cascade of white and yellow paper spilled out, littering the table right next to my water glass. Receipts, dozens of them. My mother leaned forward, her eyes flat and entirely devoid of maternal affection. She spoke with a chilling, clinical authority, treating her demand as an undeniable fact of the universe. Pay this, $250,000, the renovation money for your sister's beach house. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Next to her, Harper finally let her smugness break completely through to the surface. She leaned back heavily against her velvet chair, crossed her arms over her chest, and let out a triumphant, mocking smirk. She was waiting. She was waiting for the familiar script to play out. For 32 years, I had been the family's designated automatic teller machine, the responsible older sister who panicked, begged for reason, and ultimately yielded just to keep the peace. Harper's eyes danced with greedy anticipation, hungry for my breakdown, eager to watch me crumble under the massive weight of $250,000. I did not move. I let the silence stretch out, letting the ambient noise of the restaurant wash over the horrific reality of the moment. My gaze dropped to the scattered papers. My eyes traced the black ink on the topmost receipts. The expenses were staggering. Custom Italian marble countertops, the excavation and installation of a heated infinity pool, handcrafted, imported mahogany bedroom furniture. But it was not the luxury items that made my heart stop. It was the name printed clearly at the bottom of the largest invoice. The billing name was mine, Nova Wood. Below it was a signature, a clumsy, rushed imitation of my own handwriting. They had not just spent a fortune. They had legally bound me to it without my knowledge. They had committed blatant fraud, fully expecting my fear of corporate scandal to keep me quiet and compliant. The air in my lungs felt tight for just a fraction of a second, but then a strange sensation washed over me. It was not panic. It was not even anger. It was clarity, a cold, absolute clarity. Instead of breaking down, instead of crying or screaming, I reached out. My hand was perfectly steady. I slowly picked up the largest receipt from the pile. I looked at the massive six-figure sum, holding the paper up to the dim light of the crystal chandelier above us. Then, I looked across the table at the two women who truly believed they had just ruined my life, and a smile, incredibly thin but razor-sharp, slowly began to form on my lips. My mother interpreted my thin smile exactly as she always had, as a fracture in my resolve. The first tremor of my inevitable surrender. She leaned closer over the table, bringing with her the stifling scent of her heavy designer perfume. The ambient chatter of the restaurant seemed to fade into a dull roar as she launched into a rapid, aggressive offensive. She wanted to ensure I knew exactly how trapped I was. "Do not look at me like that, Nova," she snapped, her voice dropping to a harsh, venomous whisper. "You brought this upon yourself by being so secretive with your finances, but I am resourceful. You are the director of auditing at Auravantage Logistics. Your corporate profile is practically glowing with financial stability. I simply used your title, your impeccable credit history, and a few verified employment records to guarantee a specialized construction loan. The bank did not even blink when I submitted the application under your name." She stated this massive felony as if she were explaining a simple recipe for a weeknight dinner. She had forged my identity, weaponized my hard-earned executive position at one of the top logistics firms in the country, and she was sitting in a high-end restaurant bragging about it. Harper, emboldened by our mother's ruthless confession, decided it was her turn to twist the knife. She scoffed, rolling her eyes as she adjusted the collar of her silk blouse. "Oh, do not act so victimized, Nova," Harper drawled, her tone dripping with manipulative condescension. "You make so much money sitting in your fancy glass office all day. What is the big deal about helping your family out for once I needed a place that reflects my lifestyle? And you can easily afford the monthly payments. Besides, you owe Mom. She raised you. She put a roof over your head. This is just you paying her back for a lifetime of sacrifices." The sheer narcissism radiating from the two of them was almost palpable. They had crafted a narrative where stealing $250,000 from me was not just acceptable, it was a moral obligation I supposedly owed them. They sat there, thoroughly convinced that I was paralyzed by terror. In their minds, my silence was undeniable proof of my submission. They believed I was frantically calculating the damage this would do to my pristine reputation at Auravantage Logistics if a massive credit fraud investigation were to suddenly surface. They thought my career was their ultimate leverage. I did not argue. I did not defend my boundaries or scream about the sheer illegality of their actions. Instead, I reached out and wrapped my fingers around the delicate stem of my wine glass. I brought it to my lips and took a slow, deliberate sip of the dark red liquid. The wine was dry, acidic, and perfectly suited the metallic taste of betrayal in my mouth. I set the glass down with a gentle, controlled tap on the linen tablecloth. "I see," I said, my voice steady, betraying absolutely zero emotion. A comprehensive coastal renovation of that scale is quite an undertaking. Tell me, which general contractor did you hire to execute this vision? And more importantly, the coastal building permits. The zoning laws in that specific beachfront area are notoriously strict. Did the Municipal Planning Commission actually approve the excavation for an infinity pool? My mother scoffed loudly, waving a manicured hand in the air to dismiss my logistical concerns. She mistook my specific line of questioning for a pathetic attempt to understand the project I was now supposedly paying for. "Please, Nova," my mother said, a triumphant gleam lighting up her cold eyes. "We did not have time to wait around for 12 months of bureaucratic red tape. The Planning Commission is full of greedy politicians. We simply used your name and your corporate standing to cut a few corners. We made sure the right inspectors were compensated to look the other way. We bypassed the standard zoning committee entirely to expedite the construction phase." Harper chimed in, grinning like she had just won the lottery. "Exactly. When they saw the name of a high-ranking director at Auravantage Logistics attached to the project, they practically rolled out the red carpet. They knew you were good for it, and we know that if anyone ever asks questions, your reputation is the perfect shield. You would never let a scandal like this ruin your precious career, would you?" They were practically vibrating with pride. They had successfully bribed local officials, bypassed mandatory coastal environmental regulations, and engaged in active corporate fraud, all while deeply convinced they were untouchable masterminds. They thought they had backed me into a corner where my only option was to quietly absorb the massive debt to protect my livelihood. But as I sat there, looking at their smug, self-satisfied faces, they completely failed to realize the truth of the situation. Every single question I asked was not born from confusion or fear. Every detail they proudly confessed, every illegal shortcut they bragged about taking, was not a chain binding me to their debt. They did not know it yet, but my questions were the final, heavy hammer strikes driving the nails into the coffin of their own profound stupidity. I reached into the inner breast pocket of my tailored blazer. My mother's cold eyes tracked the subtle movement, a flicker of triumph lighting up her gaze. She was clearly expecting me to pull out my checkbook, or perhaps my phone to frantically log into my mobile banking application to assess the catastrophic damage. I did pull out my phone, but I did not open any financial platforms. Instead, I unlocked the screen and opened my encrypted messaging application. I navigated directly to the thread with my husband. Pierce, the digital keyboard glowed faintly, illuminating my face in the dim, amber light of the restaurant. I typed a single, decisive word, "Done." I pressed send. I watched the tiny blue bubble appear on the screen, a silent, digital confirmation that our meticulously planned trap was now fully closed. I locked the device and slipped it back into my pocket, folding my hands neatly together and resting them on the edge of the table. My mother glared at me, her manufactured patience wearing exceedingly thin as she waited for my breakdown. I leaned forward, matching her aggressive posture but projecting an entirely different, chilling energy. I let my voice drop an octave, removing any trace of familial warmth or expected submission. "I have known about the forged signature on that fraudulent application for exactly 6 months, I stated calmly, measuring every syllable. I knew the exact moment the very first concrete brick of that coastal villa was laid onto the dirt. A deep, harsh furrow appeared between my mother's heavily penciled eyebrows. A fleeting shadow of genuine confusion crossed her aging features, temporarily disrupting her carefully constructed mask of absolute superiority. She shifted uncomfortably in her velvet-upholstered chair, the wooden legs creaking softly beneath her weight. However, decades of deeply ingrained narcissistic conditioning do not crumble quite so easily. She quickly masked her momentary hesitation with renewed, aggressive defiance. She raised her chin, glaring down her nose at me with intense malice. "So what if you knew?" she spat out, her voice harsh and grating, completely at odds with the elegant, hushed ambiance of the fine dining room around us. Your legally binding signature is already stamped onto that high-interest construction loan contract. It is an airtight financial document. If you refuse to pay the monthly installments, those aggressive underground debt collectors will not come knocking on my front door. They will come searching for you first. They will completely destroy your pristine corporate life, freeze your legitimate assets, and ruin your perfect credit score before they ever bother to look in my direction. A genuine laugh bubbled up from deep within my chest. It was not a polite chuckle of amusement, but a sharp, biting sound that echoed strangely over the fine linen and crystal glasses. I threw my head back and laughed out loud. Both my mother and sister visibly flinched, their shoulders tensing, utterly unnerved by the unexpected sound. The overwhelming fear and desperate pleading they had so eagerly anticipated from me were entirely absent, still smiling a razor-thin smile. I reached inside my blazer pocket one final time. I pulled out a small, neatly folded stack of thick, premium paper. It was heavy, watermarked, and stamped with official county seals. I moved my hand slowly across the table and placed my legal paperwork gently, yet deliberately, onto the very center of my mother's chaotic pile of exorbitant construction receipts. "You are entirely right, Mother," I said, tilting my head slightly to observe the subtle micro-expressions on her face. I did not attempt to cancel that fraudulent loan. I did not alert the banking authorities about the blatant forgery. I simply stepped back into the shadows, and I let you and Harper happily drain every single penny of that $250,000 to finish building this magnificent, picturesque dream house by the sea. Harper could not contain her mounting, frantic anxiety for another second. She lunged forward aggressively across the table, her long, manicured acrylic nails scraping harshly against the white linen cloth as she snatched the heavy stack of legal documents. Her eyes, wide and suddenly filled with a terrifying realization, darted rapidly across the dense paragraphs of legal jargon, local zoning codes, and complex property boundary descriptions. I sat in perfect silence and watched the exact, beautiful moment her entirely fabricated reality shattered into a million pieces. The arrogant, victorious smirk that had been permanently plastered on her face for the entire evening vanished in an instant. The healthy, sun-kissed color completely drained from her cheeks, leaving her looking hollow, pale, and thoroughly sickened under the warm restaurant lights. She had finally reached the final page, the section detailing the legally registered, uncontested owner of the estate. I did not wait for her to find her voice. I delivered the finishing blow with a gentle, almost soothing, and utterly ruthless tone. Because that beautiful, luxurious coastal villa was being built on a plot of land that did not possess a clear, legally binding property title. Pierce and I approached the holding bank exactly 4 months ago. We quietly purchased the entire undeveloped foundational lot for an absolute bargain price. The deed is fully registered, notarized, and entirely under our names. You see, Mother, you did not build a luxury home using my stolen money. You simply funded a comprehensive, entirely free renovation on my personal property. My mother slammed her open palms heavily against the solid mahogany table. The sudden, violent impact rattled the delicate crystal glassware and caused several nearby diners to sharply turn their heads in our direction, their hushed conversations abruptly halting. She stood up abruptly, her chair screeching harshly against the polished hardwood floor. Her face, usually a carefully maintained mask of composed superiority, was now entirely flushed with a chaotic, ugly mixture of raw rage and sheer, unfiltered disbelief. She stammered, her voice shaking violently as she frantically pointed a trembling finger at the legal property documents resting peacefully between us. "That is legally impossible, Nova," she hissed, desperate to maintain her grip on a narrative that was rapidly disintegrating before her very eyes. "I am the registered executor of the project. My name is explicitly listed on every single one of the municipal construction permits. You cannot just swoop in out of nowhere and steal a fully permitted property." I did not even blink at her sudden display of desperate aggression. I simply picked up my white linen napkin, dabbed the corners of my mouth with agonizing slowness, and looked up at her with eyes completely devoid of sympathy. That is precisely your fatal mistake, Mother, I explained, my tone as clinical and detached as a forensic accountant evaluating a fraudulent ledger. You were incredibly arrogant. By using my corporate standing to illegally bribe those local inspectors and force those permits through the municipal system. You blatantly bypassed mandatory residential zoning laws because the land officially belonged to an entirely different entity, namely my husband and me. Those expedited permits were instantly invalidated the moment the true ownership was established. By bypassing the strict environmental regulations, you did not build a residential home. The local government has now officially classified your beautiful seaside villa as illegal commercial construction on private land. It is an unpermitted hazard. The authorities do not view you as clever developers. They view you as rogue contractors who severely damaged a delicate coastal ecosystem without a single valid piece of paperwork. Before my mother could even formulate a coherent response to that devastating legal reality, a sharp, piercing electronic ringtone shattered the remaining tension at our table. It was Harper's cell phone, vibrating aggressively against the white tablecloth. She scrambled to answer it, her manicured hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped the expensive device into her untouched plate of seared scallops. I watched the last remaining traces of color drain completely from her face as she pressed the phone tight against her ear. Even over the ambient noise of the restaurant, I could hear the frantic, distorted voice of the property manager echoing from the tiny speaker. Harper gasped loudly, her perfectly glossed lips parting in sheer horror. She kept repeating the words, chains and padlocks, in a panicked, breathless whisper. The municipal authorities were not just investigating the property, they were executing a complete, immediate lockdown of the premises. Harper slammed the phone down onto the table, her chest heaving as she stared wildly at me, completely abandoning any remaining pretense of high society restaurant etiquette. "They are locking the main gate," she shrieked, tears of absolute panic welling up in her eyes. "There are government contractors chaining up the front doors and pasting heavy neon yellow condemnation notices all over the custom windows. You cannot do this to me. Nova, I have already moved half of my expensive imported designer furniture into the master suite. I have a fundamental legal right to reside in that house." I leaned back in my chair, absorbing her frantic, delusional entitlement and reflecting it back as pure ice. "You do not have a right to anything," I replied, my voice easily slicing through her hysterical outburst. "You are not a homeowner. Harper, you never were. According to the municipal authorities and the certified property deeds, you and Mother are nothing more than illegal trespassers who have severely vandalized protected coastal land. Every single piece of luxury furniture you moved in is now officially trapped inside a condemned structure, pending a massive, drawn-out environmental investigation." My mother slowly sank back into her velvet chair, the horrifying reality of losing her luxurious beach house finally crushing the breath out of her lungs. Her mind was working frantically, scrambling desperately through the burning wreckage of her master plan to find any remaining weapons she could possibly use to destroy me. She grabbed the edge of the table, her knuckles turning completely white. If she was going down, she was determined to drag me into the financial abyss with her. The panic in her eyes rapidly hardened back into a vicious, spiteful glare. "Fine," she growled, her voice dripping with toxic venom. "Keep the damn house. Let it rot on the beach. But you are forgetting one crucial detail. You ungrateful wretch, your signature is the only name printed on that high-interest construction loan. I have already had the funds transferred, and the debt is entirely yours. You are legally on the hook for $250,000. The lending company is going to bleed you dry." A profound sense of peace washed over me, settling deep into my bones. This was the exact moment I had meticulously orchestrated for half a year. I looked directly into the dark, hateful eyes of the woman who had spent my entire life exploiting me, and I gave her a slow, deliberate nod of absolute agreement. "You are absolutely correct," I stated, my voice ringing with a terrifying calmness. "I am the sole registered borrower on that specific financial contract. It is a massive, unsecured personal liability. And tell me, Mother, Do you have any idea what actually happens when a borrower officially files a formal declaration of catastrophic bankruptcy for that exact personal loan at 8 o'clock this morning? The word bankruptcy hit my mother like a physical blow to the chest. The remaining color in her face completely vanished. She looked as though all the blood had been violently siphoned from her veins, leaving behind a terrifying ashen gray. She understood the ruthless rules of the financial game far better than Harper did, and the horrific implication of my deliberate default was finally settling into her arrogant mind. In her absolute desperation to secure $250,000 for a completely fabricated residential project, she had encountered a massive, unavoidable roadblock. Even with my forged signature and my pristine corporate credit score, a high-risk construction loan of that staggering magnitude required substantial, tangible backing. The predatory lending company she chose did not just hand out massive sums of cash based on a stolen executive title. They demanded a secondary collateral asset, a physical, legally binding guarantee. I watched her throat swallow hard, her breathing becoming shallow and erratic. She had secretly leveraged the one thing she valued above absolutely everything else. She had put up our ancestral estate, the sprawling, historic family home she currently lived in, as the secondary collateral to guarantee the fraudulent loan. She had signed those binding financial documents with complete and utter confidence, fully convinced that I would panic, assume the massive debt to protect my corporate career, and quietly make the heavy monthly payments for the next 30 years. She believed her precious, deeply treasured home was entirely safe, permanently hidden behind the thick shield of my anticipated cowardice. But because I had actively and intentionally defaulted on that specific personal loan at exactly 8 o'clock this morning, the financial institution had automatically triggered the aggressive bad debt recovery clause. The standard grace period was instantly vaporized. There were no negotiations, no warning calls, and absolutely no second chances. I leaned forward, resting my forearms against the table, closing the physical distance between us to ensure she heard every single syllable I was about to deliver. "You thought you were outsmarting the system," I said, my voice dropping to a harsh, unforgiving whisper that cut through the silence of our table. "But you failed to research the exact holding group that manages that specific high-interest lending firm. That predatory company you used to finance your illegal construction project was struggling to stay afloat. And exactly 1 month ago, Pierce executed a quiet, aggressive buyout. He purchased the controlling shares of their entire operational portfolio. Do you understand what that means?" Mother. Her eyes widened in pure, unadulterated terror. Her jaw trembled uncontrollably, but she could not produce a single sound. Her mind was frantically trying to reject the inescapable truth I was forcing upon her. I smiled, holding her horrified, desperate gaze. "My husband is now your primary creditor. We own your debt, and because the primary borrower has officially defaulted, the holding company is legally obligated to seize the secondary collateral immediately to satisfy the outstanding balance." Right on cue, as if the universe itself was meticulously orchestrating the final act of this tragedy. My mother's cell phone vibrated violently against the heavy mahogany table. It buzzed once, twice, and then a third time. She stared at the glowing digital screen as if it were a venomous snake preparing to strike. With a violently shaking hand, she reached out and tapped the notification icon. It was an automated, high-priority email alert from her primary banking institution. I did not need to read the screen to know exactly what the bold, red text stated. The email served as official, unarguable notification that her comprehensive retirement accounts had been completely frozen. Furthermore, a court-ordered foreclosure and asset seizure directive was currently being executed at her primary residence, the historic family home. Her ultimate source of pride and social standing was gone. The majestic, untouchable matriarch was utterly destroyed. She slumped forward, burying her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent, hyperventilating sobs. Next to her, Harper completely collapsed under the sheer, crushing weight of our new reality. The arrogant, self-centered woman who had mercilessly mocked me just 20 minutes ago was instantly replaced by a pathetic, desperate child. Harper fell out of her velvet chair, her knees hitting the hard wooden floor of the restaurant. Heavy, dark tears of ruined designer mascara streamed down her perfectly contoured cheeks. She reached out, her fingers desperately grabbing the edge of my blazer, sobbing hysterically. "Please, please stop this," Harper begged, her voice cracking in a high-pitched wail that drew horrified stares from the remaining patrons in the dining room. "I am so sorry. We will fix it. I will get a job. I will do absolutely anything to pay you back. Just please do not take the house. Do not leave us with nothing. Please, you are my sister." I looked down at her clinging to my jacket, and then I looked at the sobbing woman hiding her face across the table. I searched my own heart, looking for a shred of empathy, but I felt absolutely nothing. No pity, no guilt, no lingering familial obligation. I looked at them as if they were complete strangers who had simply attempted to mug me on the strict, unforgiving streets of the financial district. I gently but firmly pried Harper's trembling fingers off my clothing. I smoothed out the fabric of my blazer and calmly began gathering my purse and my legal documents from the table. "There is absolutely nothing left to stop," I stated, my voice echoing with chilling finality. "The play is over." Through the rain-streaked glass of the restaurant's grand entrance, a sleek black town car pulled up to the curb. The heavy glass doors swung open, and the cold harbor wind swept into the warm dining room, heralding the arrival of the final act. My husband, Pierce, stepped inside. His presence was commanding, his tailored charcoal suit damp from the rain, but his expression was completely unreadable. He strode across the dining floor with distinct purpose, his sharp eyes locking onto our secluded corner. He did not spare a single glance for my sister, who was still kneeling and sobbing pathetically on the floor, nor did he offer any polite greetings to my mother, who sat paralyzed in her chair. Pierce stopped right beside me. Reaching inside his overcoat, he withdrew a thick, securely bound legal folder and dropped it squarely in front of my mother. The heavy thud of the documents hitting the table sounded like a gavel coming down in a courtroom. "Those are the finalized court orders for the immediate seizure of your primary residence," Pierce stated, his voice a low, authoritative rumble. "The local sheriff's department is currently executing the eviction protocol. Furthermore, copies of your forged credit applications have been formally submitted to the Federal Fraud Division. You no longer have a beach house. You no longer have a family home. By tomorrow morning, you will both be formally indicted for felony credit fraud." My mother stared at the terrifying yellow and black seals on the folders. She looked up at me, her face a twisted mask of agonizing grief and absolute defeat. Her empire of manipulation was reduced to ashes in less than an hour. "Why," my mother choked out, tears of genuine helplessness finally spilling over her eyelashes and cutting through her expensive makeup. "If you already owned the land, and we paid for the construction, why destroy us? You could have just kept the luxury house. You got a $250,000 property for absolutely nothing. Why take my home too? How can you be so incredibly cold-blooded to your own flesh and blood?" I looked down at her, feeling a profound sense of closure. The terrified little girl who had spent 3 decades trying to earn her mother's approval was completely gone, replaced by the woman standing here today. "I am not keeping that house," I replied, my voice completely devoid of any malice, simply stating a matter of historical fact. "I never had any intention of keeping a single brick of it, because you illegally built a massive commercial structure on a highly protected shoreline. The municipal fines levied against the property owner were astronomical. So, yesterday afternoon, I signed a binding deed of gift." Harper stopped crying for a fraction of a second, looking up at me with red, swollen eyes. "I donated the entire coastal lot, including your beautiful, illegally constructed villa, to the Marine Resource Conservation Committee," I explained smoothly. "In exchange for waiving all environmental penalties against my name, the committee has agreed to completely demolish the structure. Next week, government bulldozers will tear down your imported Italian marble and smash your infinity pool into dust. They are leveling the entire $250,000 property to create a protected nesting sanctuary for sea turtles. The house you tried to steal from me will never belong to anyone." My mother let out a guttural, agonizing wail. She collapsed forward, burying her head into her arms on the table, completely broken by the realization that her monumental greed had resulted in absolute literal destruction. I stood up straight and allowed Pierce to gently drape my heavy wool coat over my shoulders. I looked down one final time at the two women who had spent my entire life violently extracting my energy, my finances, and my youth. "You once taught me that family is priceless." "Mother," I said softly, the words hanging heavily in the air above their desperate sobbing. "Today, I am merely reappraising exactly what you are truly worth." I turned my back on them. I did not look back as Pierce placed a hand on the small of my back, guiding me away from the table. We walked together across the dining room, leaving the hysterical, despairing cries of my mother and sister fading into the background hum of the restaurant. When we pushed through the front doors, stepping out into the freezing, relentless storm, I did not reach for my umbrella. I stood under the dark, turbulent sky and took a massive, deep breath. The icy wind bit into my cheeks, but for the very first time in my entire 32 years of existence, the air tasted incredibly sweet. It was crisp, clean, and completely untainted by obligation or guilt. The heavy, suffocating chains of my past were permanently shattered on that dining room floor. I exhaled slowly, watching my breath plume in the cold air, stepping forward into a future that finally, truly belonged to me. Thank you so much to everyone for listening to my story today. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please let me know your city and country in the comments below. If you found today's story compelling and want to hear more, please consider supporting us by joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon. Over there, you can listen to our very best, highly exclusive true stories that are far too intense and detailed to be made public on YouTube. You can easily join by scanning the QR code right here on your screen, or by clicking the Patreon link provided in the video description and the pinned comment below. Thank you again for your time, and I will see you in the next story.